Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Judith Viorst wrote a children's book entitled I'll Fix Anthony, and I think it reflects the universal human experience. The book begins like this. My brother Anthony can read books now, but he won't read any books to me. He plays checkers with Bruce from his school, but when I want to play, he says, "Go away or I'll clobber you." I let him wear my Snoopy sweatshirt, but he never lets me borrow his sword. Mother says deep down in his heart, Anthony loves me. Anthony says deep down in his heart, he thinks I stink. Mother says deep down in his heart, where he doesn't even know it, Anthony loves me. Anthony says deep down in his heart, he still thinks I stink. When I'm 6, I'll fix Anthony. The story goes on from there as reasons to get Anthony mount up, and the desire for retaliation mounts as well. We know how that feels. We want to get even, and the desire can consume us. This week we are looking at a part of the Sermon on the Mount called the Antitheses, where Jesus begins the statement with, "You have heard that it was said," and then adds, "But I say to you." In these statements, Jesus is calling us to a radical new way to live in love for our neighbor. So far, we've been challenged pretty hard. Fair warning, that will continue today. Our passage today comes from Matthew 5, verses 38 through 42. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. Perhaps the first thing I want to say will be the most surprising. The commandment about an eye for an eye comes from Exodus 21, and it actually appears that things weren't often practiced this way. Often, monetary settlements were reached between disputing parties. But here's the thing. This law in Exodus wasn't recommending the practice of an eye for an eye, but rather establishing the limits of retribution. The law is there to say, take no more than an eye for an eye. For example, if someone knocks out your tooth, you aren't allowed to cut off his arm or behead him. There's no room for escalation of the conflict. The most retaliation you can take is an equal amount. No one is sure what Jesus means next about not resisting evil. It would seem like the call of a Christian is to resist evil, but it may be that Jesus is applying this statement to a society under Roman rule. They were perilous times, and perhaps Jesus' words about resisting evil simply meant that it wasn't worth it to resist the Romans who would kill you without a moment's thought. Only Jesus then gives 3 examples, and his hearers would have expected that Jesus would be giving them exceptions to the rule. Instead, Jesus extends and intensifies his point. The first example involves denigration or insult, a slap on the face. The people listening would have expected Jesus to urge them to action, but instead Jesus tells them to turn the other cheek. This is hard for us. We are prideful beings. And yet there is ample evidence from history of passive resistance working over and over. Not striking back with violence exposes the violent person to see themselves in a new way, and in their shame they change. Things change. Likewise, we find Jesus' comments about someone asking for your coat and his guidance to give your cloak as well. Some think that Jesus is talking about Roman taxation here. In other words, don't just pay what they demand, give more. The common view was that Rome was robbing Israel of wealth and pride. But for Jesus, a community of love was more important than either of those. A third example about going the second mile is similar. The Romans would commandeer pack animals or boats or people to carry their supplies. The people of Israel were forced to carry the Roman baggage as if they were slaves. This was a widespread practice, and there was widespread resentment of it. But again, Jesus' call is to be a member of a transformed society where the old rules don't apply. Now, he says, we are called to live in love for others. Leviticus 19:18 might sum it up well. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Jesus calls us to live by that law. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.